Welcome to Disrupt Education. I'm Peter Hostrasser. Hey, I have got an unbelievably great superintendent with me, Caposey, Dr. PJ Caposey here. Meridian, talk to me, PJ. Tell me a little bit about who you are, man, and what you're leading up.
Well, thanks for having me, first of all. Honored to be with you and connect again. So I'm the Super Meridian 223, and if anyone's in Illinois, you understand that the great wisdom of Illinois, there's 3 meridians. Which I don't understand how we couldn't be more creative than to name each district independently. But we're the one in Northwest Illinois, about 1,500 students in 4 buildings. One of the Meridians has had a ton of turnover since I've been a superintendent. And every time it comes open, I get like 50 texts. What did you do? It wasn't me this time. Like it wasn't me. So we're small town rural. We like to say agricultural, but we're not really anymore. There's a lot of farmland, but it's owned by a lot of people that are outside of the district. I mean, we have some farmers in town, but it's a more industry than it is in terms of lifestyle, if that makes sense. Yeah. Although Tractor Day is still a big deal. Yeah. And so we're an interesting kind of small town school where we are the show in town. So there's it's a blessing and a curse in terms of our parent engagement and involvement. Because it is important. We are the lifeline to town. We have literally no industry outside of agriculture. So 0% of our tax base comes from industry. So we also have some unique challenges because although we're not a poor area, we're a poor district because we have no industry to pull off of in terms of a tax base. So the journey here has been really interesting. This is my 9th year. When I arrived, I was the 5th soup in 3 calendar years.
Wow.
So it was nice because my bar was if I wasn't, sexually harassing anyone or stealing money, I was killing it. So it was a nice low bar to jump over at the beginning. And that's all hyperbolic, obviously, but we were just hemorrhaging money. And so we were about $1 million shortfall each year, which was over 5% of our budget that we were just wasting away. So one of the first board meetings we had, we let go of 26 employees, which is about 12% of our staff. And so from there, we've had to kind of repair and reimagine and redo almost everything in the district over the course of 8 years. So it took about 3 years to stabilize, and then we got rolling in about year 4, which is kind of how the change process works. And then the pandemic hit, and so now we're trying to figure out how fast we can continue to go moving forward. So that's what's going on in Meridian.
Yeah. Wow. Hang in there. I mean, oh my gosh. But that's, I think, part of the reason what intrigued me about you, and we'll get to that around, constant change, obviously, even before pandemic. But before we get to that, I got to ask, how was PJ as a student? What was your learning journey like? What kind of student were you? And how did you learn from that in the capacity that you're leading right now?
So I was just sharing some stories earlier with one of my coaching clients, but I was perfect on paper. So it's interesting because my kids are 16 and 14, and then I got twin 7-year-olds right now. So I tease my 16 and 14-year-old because while on paper, I was class president and, you name the accolade, I was fortunate enough to be honored or recognized with it, but I was a little bit naughty. And so I kind of know the tricks. And so it was, I was fortunate to I went to a massive high school. So I was Lincoln Way I was Lincoln Way Classic when it was 1. So graduating class, about 1,200 kids. So while it was easy to stand out, it was also easy to blend in. So it's kind of that perfect mix for someone that wanted to get into a little bit of mischief, but stay out of trouble. So in terms of a student, I pushed myself, I was in all the AP classes. I liked learning, but I was the type of kid that I laugh at now when I watch, because I would have spent 45 minutes trying to find the easier way around something when it would have taken me 30 minutes just to do it. And so I had some cunning about me, but which has been good in a lot of ways in life. But as a student, I don't know if it helped or hurt, but was able to do well in school and go to college on a full academic scholarship, which also afforded me the ability to play sports, because I was probably better at sports than athletics, even though I liked athletics more. So you hear about kids getting full rides to go play athletics. I was the kid that was able to be on some athletic teams because I was already a full ride on the academic side, so it didn't cost anyone anything. But yeah, it was, as a student, I liked learning and I liked playing the game of school more than I liked school. But I definitely was one of the kids that figured out how to play the game first and foremost.
So I can imagine, like in the situation that you came into there, way pre-pandemic, and change. Nobody likes change. We get pretty comfortable, especially in the as a 20-year veteran in the classroom myself, and dabble here in administration. It's easy to get into an area where you just you're repeating the same thing over and over again. How have you taken that, like pre-pandemic, your district was already changing. There was a lot of things going through. Man, kind of walk us a little bit through, what were some of the highlights of that change that, on the administrative side, I know that change is extremely difficult. It is. And you have so many different lenses coming in. And then you're almost under a microscope. I went to a very small high school in Indiana, so I totally understand, the rural areas and how they work, because you are the main show. How do you work through that as a superintendent, both mentally and physically? And we're talking pre-pandemic here, but what are some of the things that you do to, number one, not only take care of an entire community, which you are, but also take care of yourself?
Yeah, so I think it's interesting. So I think change is a process, right? Like you can read a 14 million textbooks on it, or leadership memoirs, whatever. So change has a process to it. But if I say anything about it, I think it's contextual. So when I arrived here, things were so dysfunctional, literally everywhere except the classrooms, right? Like the teachers were doing their thing, just everything around them. And so with that dysfunction allows a leader to almost usurp authority, right? Like, so I was able to gather a bunch of authority and push a bunch of change through really rapidly because there was just a vacuum. Now, what happened is we stabilized, and I wanted to keep going at that pace. And then people started to look around and be like, hey, it was cool when you got us, out of being completely dysfunctional, but now maybe you need to chill out a little bit. And so that was an interesting process for me, is to be like, all right, I was going 100 miles an hour. I felt great. Like, I like crisis. So I was good leading through that. Then we got to equilibrium, and we were an average district in terms of our level of chaos. We were above average in terms of our level of performance. And I wanted to keep going. And people were like, hey, like, we just got done getting our butts kicked for 5 years with nonsense going on. Maybe you can chill out now. So it was a really interesting process, because I was able to accelerate really fast, but then it was like the context said, okay, now it's time. You have to actually work a process. So then we started to iterate through what that change process looked like for us, which again, to me, takes a handful of years, right? Like, because once the crisis was over, the sense of urgency was also over. And again, the benefit was that our teachers were teaching their butts off the whole time. So like, we weren't in trouble in terms of performance or test scores or community perception of what was going on in the classroom. So to say, hey, we're at level A, we need to flip it to level B, was an interesting sell, just because there was no urgency. And so, but just to give you like a quick snippet of, like, if someone's listening, yeah, what does chaos look like? When I arrived, we didn't have email 9 years ago, didn't have functional email. We were never even dreamed of having, like, ubiquitous Wi-Fi didn't exist, let alone we were able to leverage it. We had no benchmarking assessment. We were outside of, again, what the teachers were doing with their doors shut in their classroom. We had several buildings where evaluations had just not ever been done. We were a backwards in a lot of ways, again, except for the product the kids were receiving and the parents saw. So then once we cleaned up all the back end stuff and we wanted to change the front porch stuff, people were like, whoa, you fixed all the stuff that we said was broken, but now what are we doing? So that's when it became a much more iterative process in terms of trying to work through what we could do better.
No email. Oh my gosh. Like, I don't know. Yeah, I've got 1,000 things running in my head, where you're running stone tablets, for crying out loud. But that's pretty amazing.
Yeah, I mean, so right before I got hired, they had crashed and they had no backup. And so it was several. So when I got hired, it's like, all right, give me an email address. Let's start rolling. They're like, well, not yet. I'm like, oh, okay. And again, we got up and running, and that forced us to move into being a Google school probably 3 years earlier than we might have been. Like, so it may have been a blessing in disguise. But with the crash came literally every bit of teacher storage went away. So anything that was a relic, an archive that wasn't outside saved, that was relying on the district to save it, had literally been lost within a few months of my arrival, on top of all the other dysfunction that was happening and the massive layoffs and the massive rifts. And so it was a weird time to come in.
And so as you went through that, now we jump forward. You would almost think the Disney ending would be, hey, we're in a pandemic. Oh, we got this. But obviously a whole new set of interesting challenges arise. Obviously this last month, we were talking about, on Disrupt Education, we were talking about teacher burnout, right? I feel like if you held on to the teachers that were just making things happen through what you just talked about, amazing. And I know you did. And then going through, okay, here comes another wave, right? Talk a little bit about, how a rural district handled what we went through in the last, almost 2 years to the day, in the pandemic, and what were some of the new challenges, but also created some opportunities for you guys.
Yeah, I mean, I think that we were incredibly well positioned to handle the outset of the pandemic, which was a massive shift from where we were. So a lot of the things that we may have taken criticism for investing in, tech infrastructure, technology, et cetera, along the way, where people are like, why do we need all this stuff? When we had to turn that, battleship around in the harbor and like this, and we could do it literally overnight by flipping a switch because we were already embedded with Google Classroom and having all, which was abnormal for a rural school, right? Like there's different parts of Illinois, there's different parts of America in terms of what's normal and abnormal. So the fact that we were able to literally launch on Tuesday when the announcement came on Friday was abnormal, and I think people sincerely appreciate it. So from the community standpoint, that's what's been interesting, right? Like, because we were heroes 2 years ago. And then when we started back off, last year we were hybrid. Some districts around us were remote. Some districts around us were fully in person. There was no uniformity. So we went from heroes to goats, no matter which way it was, either because we were being unsafe or we were being too cautious, right? Like no matter what, as the hybrid, it was it was like a C+ solution, right? Like it was okay, you could pass it, but it wasn't making anyone happy. And then into this year with the masking controversy. So what I think, one of the things that I said when I first got hired to the teaching staff, especially a lot because I was a high school guy, coming into a lot of the elementary, I think were skeptical because I had no elementary experience. And one of the things I said, look, my primary job is to insulate you from all of the craziness and the nonsense so that you can do your job, and then provide you the resources you need to do your job, then set out a vision, provide support and accountability. But first, I need to insulate you. And I sincerely believe that. Like the number one thing I can do as district office, if district office is a headache remover for teachers as opposed to a headache giver, like I think most teachers in the universe would be like, heck yeah. Like even if there was bad vision, lack of accountability, like if we're just removing headaches instead of causing headaches, we're doing good. And so I think we've kind of moved back into that role, with the exception of I haven't been able to reduce that for teachers. No matter how hard I've tried or what I've wanted to do, or if I'm the one that's trying to take the arrows or whatever the case is, it has trickled down into the classroom over and over again in terms of feeling underappreciated, vilified, whatever whatever that process looks like. It's just been stressful. Now, on top of that, we went out for an ed fund referendum in the middle of the pandemic. So in case it wasn't enough, we had a large 0.7 referendum on the ballot in the midst of this. So on top of everything else, I think that's been the hardest thing in terms of like just acknowledging what teachers are going through, and then also understanding that we probably don't have a solution. And so the thing that I keep talking about right now, and just wrote an article that'll come out in Edutopia here in a couple of weeks, is like, I think everyone's having the exact same conversation, except we're having them in different hallways. So like I mean this sincerely, I know some amazing administrators that I hope to be like when I grow up, right? And I also know some administrators I'm like, I don't know that maybe you should still be an administrator, right? Like I know the whole continuum. I don't know a single administrator that isn't truly, sincerely concerned for the well-being of their teachers right now. And I also know that the teachers are going through some stuff right now. I also don't believe it's as bad as like teacher Twitter will have you believe. Like, I don't think it's that bad. But I think that every teacher is going through some stuff, and we're all having the same conversation about how do we get through this together. But I feel like we're having it in two completely different hallways where the teachers are saying their piece, administration isn't listening, administrators are trying their best, teachers aren't appreciating. And so I think that at some point for us to get through this, that conversation has to start to coalesce together. And that's what we're trying to start. I think we've realized now we're trying to kind of mend that in our district. Benefit of size, I think, and benefit of previous really good labor relations. Our complicating factor is we're negotiating right on top of it, which makes it a little bit more complicated right now. But I just think that conversation has to take place is to, like, look, I don't know that there's a single thing we can do to make teachers feel appreciated for all that they've done. And I mean, it's sincerely, like, I just don't know that we'll ever be able to catch that up. It doesn't forgive us of the responsibility to do it. And vice versa, right? Like, there has to be an acknowledgement that there's effort, even if the effort isn't necessarily good enough, right? And I think that might help us get through. But it's a battle right now in terms of just trying to keep everyone's head above water. Like, the analogy I use all the time is like really hard to swim when you're trying not to drown. And I feel like everyone's just trying not to drown right now, right? And so it's very hard to get to the other end of the pool. And so that's our hope, at least my hope for the remainder, right? We have 3 months left of school. Can we start swimming to the other end? Because I think if we all are going in the same direction, we can start to point that out for each other. But if we're just admiring how hard it is, it's going to be really hard to get through the next 12 weeks.
Truly. I think, it was interesting this morning. We had a new teacher meeting. So I'm new to my school. I'm only a couple years into the school I'm at. And we just had like this speaking circle, and it was really good. So there were administrators in there were teachers in there, et cetera, et cetera. And also, one thing that actually helps me as well, and you alluded to it, and I'm guessing you're doing this, is we get a message from, obviously, we're a big school district where I work, from, our superintendent, and like shooting it straight like you do actually helps. I mean, it really does. And I think one of the things that I hear from a lot of teacher Twitter is, some administration doesn't shoot straight, but also some teachers embellish. So it's, it's that interesting area there of that. So moving forward, right? So we've got some things we've learned here. Good and bad, but I kind of, I like to, even it's disrupt education, I'd like to use those disruptions as opportunities. What are some of the opportunities that you see, not only just obviously in education in the community as a whole, as a leader, maybe some of the things some of your teachers are doing, what is the community doing different that you're going to kind of hold on to and possibly play around with to, increase some of that student learning and engagement?
Yeah, so I think that the interesting part is what is going to be, thrown out the baby with the bathwater, right? Like that. So I have people that were 2.5 years ago that we were incentivizing, through compensation and praise and whatever else, like, hey, we need to launch and be into Google Classroom. They were super excited about it. And then they had to use it last year. And now they're like, to hell with Google Classroom, right? Like, and not because it didn't work, just because it was exhausting, right? And so I think our number one biggest possibility, especially for small rural, is figuring out how to do hybrid with kids from other districts, right? Because ultimately, we're not going to be able to find a Spanish 4 teacher in 10 years, maybe. But the school down the street might, whereas we have a welding teacher or, whatever it is that they don't have. And we're going to have to share services. And I think this has been kind of the gateway drug to understanding that. So I don't think, so my hope was last year as I was sitting here, I'm like, this is great. This is it, right? This is the appetizer. We're going to be able to jump in. I think it's had the opposite effect. I say hybrid right now, my teachers get chills down their spine, right? So just because it was so hard last year. But at some point, I think the realization with the teacher shortage and with the ubiquitous nature of technology, it makes no sense for me to try to find a physics teacher when I know that there's a really highly qualified physics teacher, maybe 375 miles away, but also on a block schedule that we can tap our kids into, right? Like, so at some point as a state, as an educational community, even beyond state borders, we're going to have to embrace that. And I think like it could be really, really exciting, because it's not just us having this conversation. It's also community colleges. It's also some four-year universities are getting into how do we do this together, because it's a problem, right? Like, and so it's the old never waste a good crisis. Now, I think there's some fatigue and some burnout, and I'm not saying this hyperbolically. I think there's some trauma that our teaching staff has gone through. So like, it's not next year, right? But I think that the seeds are planted now for that to really transform what we're doing in terms of what we imagine school to be, as we move forward. And I don't know that it's going to be universal, but I do think that in 5 years, when we're seeing schools win awards, that's what it's going to be based on in the rural sector. That's what we're going to be doing. And I hope that I can facilitate that change in my district, in order to get enough of our people on board. So that's the big thing for me at the 6-12 level, at the K-5 level. I think we're actually probably nationwide early to the game, but after learning about it, I think we're late to the game and moving to science to read the science of reading, and trying to make that fundamental switch in how we teach literacy skills, and embedding it and truly throwing everything we've got into literacy as kind of a fundamental human right, in order to get there. And again, we've been fortunate that we're a district where it's not on fire. It's not urgent, because we're okay, and probably above average to good, depending on most metrics that you look at. But trying to make sure that we understand that that's not good enough. So those are two big, kind of massive shifts that we're doing. We're going to completely shift how we teach literacy K-5, and hopefully 6-12, we're going to move to a model where we're interdependent with other schools. And I think that, again, for smaller districts, this is going to be our ticket to survival, whether we like it or not. So for me, I'd much rather embrace it and leverage it and be the model and maybe actually use it as a revenue stream, as opposed to one that's going to be beholden to others that have jumped first.
That's exciting, but I get it. It's also scary. But as an educator going through myself as a pandemic, and your worlds open up, and there's a lot of community challenges that you can come together with other communities. There's a lot of opportunity in that. Obviously, we know that, the active changes that you previously said, it's tough. It's hard. There's a lot of stress and stressors and et cetera. But yeah, I do like that. And I was actually going to ask you about it, but you answered the questions about, rural teacher shortages and the way to handle it. And it is interesting. There's a lot of things out there. I'm on LinkedIn a lot, working with a lot of innovative educational areas and different things like that. So that's very, very interesting. And yeah, I think our listeners will be watching and listening around that.
So this is something I don't think most educators necessarily realize, but there's a handful of really hard to staff positions already, right? Like, so, and so people always point to, okay, we got our upper level science and we've got our foreign language, or we've got our CTE. That doesn't even scratch the surface compared to speech pathology, ed psych, et cetera. So what has happened now with those limited those areas where there's a limited amount of certificated people and there's demand, is that there's for-profit private industries that then essentially become headhunters for these people. And so in many, many, many districts, particularly as you get rural, those are no longer scheduled positions. They don't fit on the salary schedule because you're paying a third party who's then paying their employees. So for instance, a first-year speech path in a district that might start at $40,000 a year is making $100,000 a year. So that private influence is, my emails are blowing up with those companies now that are expanding to other hard to fill positions. So as much as like unions might initially be like, whoa, I don't know that we want this private influence. Yes, you do. Because as soon as they're saying, hey, I'm going to get, this new teacher $70,000, well, then it's going to make the negotiation. So the entire financial world of education is about to get turned on its head, and states are going to need to commit to say, okay, this is what we want or not want, or local communities are going to have to commit, because with the shortage, when the supply doesn't meet the demand, then there's one way to fix that typically, that's financially. And so it's going to be really interesting to see what happens in 10 years, right? Because this problem is going to propagate itself and move forward. And so what happens with the teacher shortage is ultimately that leads to a leadership shortage. So this is coming for the principal, and it's already at the super ranks, right? Like, look how many interims we have around the state. It's insane. So this is only going to get exacerbated at different levels. So I'm really interested to see how it works out, and I'm interested to see how, capitalistic, entrepreneurial, private enterprise will end up driving the salary schedules in schools as the shortage continues.
It's I've always called it, and I'm going to give a shout out to Mike Yates out of Texas talking about it. Like we're becoming free agents, really, which is very interesting. I will tell you, even as a 20-year veteran in the classroom, that excites me. Of course, there's going to be downsides to everything, but I just, like you, I look for the opportunities there, and how can I grow and scale what I do, what I love to do, which is really, teach and learn from students in specific areas. So, again, I think that's one of the reasons that you intrigued me, and coming on Disrupt Education was because you do not shy away from that. You let's talk reality here. But I also want to give a chance for people to reach out. You've done some writing. You do a lot of different things as well as changing schools over and over again. So you got a lot on your plate. But I wanted to leave off here by giving you a chance to, how can people connect with you? Can they, I think you got your name on a few books. Maybe you want to mention those. How can people connect?
Lots of different ways. So the easiest way to connect is I'm on social media at MCUSD, so Meridian Community Unit School District. SUP, I'm a SUPE guy. There's a big divide in the superintendent community over what the appropriate abbreviation is. So after we fist fight about that, so I'm MCUSD SUP on pretty much every social media, or just my name. And then my email is PCaposey, first initial, last name, @gmail, which is open for whatever. I have a TED Talk out there that you can check out on the TED website, again, just by searching the name. And I'm author of 8 books so far, so a couple bestsellers in there. So if you go to the Amazon page, you can see and read all about that. So it's interesting because all of those, that's one of the things that I just said to my wife, is that I haven't written a book, and now 2020 was the last one. So I was cranking about a book every 9 months, just based on what I was thinking, right? Like, so there wasn't really strategy or like, here's a market gap I'm going to exploit. I was just writing because I processed through writing, and it was a wonderful outlet for me. I haven't had time to do that in the last 15 to 18 months. So I have like 6 ideas that I want to exploit in due time. So I'm looking very forward to the time where I sit down at 6 a.m. and don't have 14 emails and nasty grams to respond to, and I can crank out 5 pages a day and get something in the works. So hopefully, again, that starts up.
Well, I will be putting that Amazon link with your name down below in the show notes as well, for people to take a look at that. If there's any indication of how much of a hit that administration is taking during these last couple of years, I mean, I think you just said it there. Something that, as a writer, pumping out books, and then that all stopped. We know leaders in your capacity have so much on their plate, and understanding how to manage their time. And then when that happens, that's an indicator. So we'll be looking forward to some new writings from you pretty soon. PJ, thank you so much for hanging out with us on Disrupt Education today, man.
Thank you. Always awesome.
And thank you, listeners. We'll catch you next time on Disrupt Education.